Gamers, we're here today to talk about some Arc Warlock, which I realize I did talk about somewhat recently if episode 3 is considered recent. We talked a lot about it during episode 3 because Warlock had quite a lot of stuff going for it. It had the newly introduced Ionic Sentry, which has proven itself to be an incredibly good aspect, and we will be using it in today's build. We were blessed with Geomag Stabilizers getting an absolutely crazy buff where it was giving 7% super energy whenever you picked up an Ionic Trace. It has since been nerfed, but is still incredibly good. And we had an artifact that had, I think, 4 or 5 different arc-related things, specifically Bolt Charge, that just helped bolster this particular setup. So this was a very, very good setup back in episode 3, and I have been playing it with it a lot recently, and I can absolutely confirm that this build is still 100% cooking in pretty much all modes of play, even down to using something like Delicate Tomb, which is generating a lot of Ionic Traces, a lot of burst damage, all that kind of good stuff. But in the Renegades patch, we got a buff to another Arc Warlock exotic, Stormdancer's Brace. So Stormdancer's Brace, essentially since it's been in the game, has had its effectiveness tied to however good Stormtrance actually is at any given moment. And I would say Stormtrance has been bad more than it's been good, at least compared to other supers, for an incredibly long time now. So the question that I wanted to answer is, with the buff that Stormdancer's Brace got, is it actually worth using? Is Stormtrance worth using? What is going on with this particular setup? What did Stormdancer's Brace actually get in the patch? It got a couple of changes. While Stormtrance is equipped, it now grants Bolt Charge for arc ability hits when amplified, and Stormtrance damage bonus now builds on hits instead of kills. That was a big problem, is that Stormtrance just doesn't really hit that hard. So if you're in super high level content where you're not really killing a ton of things, you can never really stack this damage bonus whatsoever. So now you need 30 hits to hit the damage cap, but the top end damage bonus has been completely unchanged. It's still the same amount. You can just actually stack it now without having to go kill a bunch of things. Also, this has refunds super energy when it ends. I don't know why this is so ambiguous. Because it just reads like, oh, you just get some super energy when it's over. You do need to like actually kill things when you're using this in order to get some super energy refunded. I think I killed all of the orange bar legionnaires in the shooting range just for like a test cycle, and it got me about 25 to 30% of my super energy back. If you don't kill anything, you don't get any super energy back. I don't know why this is so ambiguous. So you do have to kill some stuff in order to get some super energy back. Anyway, so I was talking about this particular build, and there might be some people out there who like want to know what build I was running here, and fortunately the build is the exact same as the build that I'm going to talk about right now. So let's talk about this a little bit. Our aspects, we have Ionic Sentry, which did also get changed in the Renegades patch, where it no longer will self-blind, which is one of the best changes of the entire patch. I used to blind myself so much with this ability. It no longer does that, so that is very, very nice. Next, we have Arc Soul. And some people might be thinking like, oh, why are you not on Electrostatic Mind? Electrostatic Mind is very, very good. I found it that we were getting enough Ionic Traces, I think, that we didn't really need Electrostatic Mind, and we opted for Arc Soul instead because we are going to have it up a pretty good amount, and we also do have a good amount of grenade stat. However, if you did want to run with Electrostatic Mind for like whatever reason, I think that's also totally fine. I just found Arc Soul to be a little more effective to generate supers because, as we'll talk about, the entire point of this build is to generate as many supers as we possibly can. Abilities wise, you know, I'm just on Pulse Grenade. I don't think it really matters too much what kind of grenade you're on, except for, well, I mean, I probably wouldn't use Skip Grenade, but I like Pulse Grenade. If you have a preference, you can totally use that. Obviously, we're going to be on Stormtrance. Let's talk about our fragments here. I am very much set up for mid to high tier content. I've been doing a ton of Lawless Frontiers, so I am set up the most for Lawless Frontiers type experiences. So that's going to be Spark of Resistance, you know, just being a little more damage resistant while you're surrounded by combatants, because you are basically always surrounded. And Stormtrance doesn't exactly have insane amounts of range, so you do need to get kind of close to some targets. Spark of Ions to generate some Ionic Traces. Then we have Spark of Frequency to boost our Bolt Charge capabilities, since the artifact does have have a bunch of bolt charge related. Sorry, not a bunch, but its main thing is bolt charge related. And then I was just trying Spark of Recharge for like a couple of things because I did find myself critically wounded a decent amount when we were in the Lawless Frontiers. But the build, the fragment that I was using on the other build was Spark of Discharge. Collecting Ionic Trace gives you a stack of bolt charge, and arc weapon kills have a chance to create an Ionic Trace. If you have something else that you want to mess around with here, maybe you're into the whole blinding combo with like Spark of Brilliance and all that kind of stuff. If you want to do that, that's totally fine. You are going to be very ability heavy in this build if you are, you know, actually doing the build correctly, doing it some justice. So I don't know how much you're going to be working with your weapons in the meantime, but you will want to use them in case you ever have to kind of reboot the engine. The stats that I've been running with, I think I can still make some small changes here. This was my initial setup that I was working with just to, you know, start testing the waters. Where do I want to be? Generally speaking, I do think I could probably reduce some of my melee stat down to throw it either into more super or more grenade or maybe even class stat. I wanted my class stat to be somewhat, you know, around where we were before Edge of Fate, so right in that 70 range, just to make sure we have a good amount of them coming in. As you can see, I've done very, very little with my weapon stat because we're mainly using abilities. This is an ability-based setup, and pretty much the only time that I break out my weapons is to switch to Delicate Tomb to blast a bunch of high-damage shots, because whenever you pick up an Ionic Trace, you get a very, very juiced-up shot. It deals a bunch of extra damage, and it jolts. So we are trying to abuse this as much as we possibly can in order to just help, you know, work on single target damage or any sort of high priority targets or anything like that. My machine gun is just a Terminus Horizon. I think any sort of arc machine gun will do just fine. This one's nothing too remarkable. You know, it does run out of ammo pretty quickly. So if you do have something maybe a little more traditional that can reload, you know, rewind round kind of situation, whatever, I would probably opt for that. And then finally in our mod slots, I have an Ashes to Assets. We have a Harmonic Siphon for arc weapons, and then I actually run with Power Preservation because, again, we want to be making as many supers as we possibly can. We are getting some really, really, really fast supers, and I was like, you know what? I never use Power Preservation. Let's make some more orbs for my teammates, because if they're getting more supers, that's going to feed me more supers, which can feed them more supers, back and forth, back and forth. And I actually have been liking this quite a lot. In our arms, we just have a lot of things that, you know, when you use an ability, get more ability energy for a different ability, pretty much standard resistances in our chest piece. In the legs, I realize I just said I don't really mess with too much of the weapon stat here, but this kind of gets around some of those weaknesses because you are going to be collecting a ton of orbs. You should have pretty much maxed out armor charge all of the time, and we're running with a ton of arc weaponry, so just any sort of bonus ammo that we can get to keep that engine rolling is going to be really, really worth it. And then finally, Time Dilation, Powerful Attraction Bomber. This is pretty much my go-to default setup for any sort of class item, anything that I do. In terms of other arc weaponry that you might want to run with, if you don't want to run with Delicate Tomb, we have Antedate from the Raid, which is a very, very good SMG. Can get, I've been rolling with Jolting Feedback here. We also have Unfall in case you were grinding a lot in the Edge of Fate era. This is also very, very good. Rocket Sidearm. New for Renegades, though, is the PSI Eterna 4, which is an arc rocket pulse. And if you do want to mess around with something like Blast Distributor, if you're good at micromanaging something like that, you could totally use this. I probably wouldn't be using Elemental Honing for this, so I'd probably switch over to like One for All or Rolling Storm. And maybe if you want to experiment with Trickle Charge, in case you're maybe not as good with Blast Distributor, you could totally do that as well. So I want to take a quick detour to the shooting range just so I can show you guys the differences in damage or DPS between the Geomag setup versus the Stormdancer setup, kind of give you an idea of what we're working with here. So this, we just have Geomag stabilizers. My super is at 94, so we don't have any bonus damage on this one because I was focused a little bit more on getting out Ionic Sentries. And so we're just going to shoot this guy in the face. So this super lasts about 8 seconds, and we can just divide our damage by our DPS to see, you know, how long it took us to actually do that. So this has been pretty consistent with a bunch of the tests that I've run in terms of our total damage. So now we're going to switch over to this one. So obviously, you know, not as exciting numbers-wise. Takes a little while to ramp up. And it takes about 75% of our super to get to Ascending Amplitude X30 in order to really reach the max damage. But this is only focused on one target, right? It's not really something you want to go single target with right off the rip. Like, the ideal is kill a bunch of weaker stuff, stack it up to 30, and then start shifting over to your big boy enemies, right? We can see that it does more total damage, but it takes a bit longer for it to actually get there, so our DPS is going to be a little bit lower. But in terms of total damage, it's at least competing if you do have more time to work with. And we can also show, you know, what something might look like with multiple targets here, so we'll pull that up. So not only are we going to be dealing more damage overall because we have more targets, we're also going to be dealing more damage because we're stacking our effect here, Ascending Amplitude, much faster. And also, these guys are 10 meters apart, and the chaining capabilities are actually quite nice here. I literally saw the DPS number and I was like, I mentally froze. I just completely froze in thought. So in case you need a quick refresher on how this build works, the goal is to essentially get Ionic Sentry as fast as possible by getting arc or kinetic weapon kills or ability kills or all that kind of stuff, throw it out, and then just keep chaining the kills as much as you possibly can, dropping your rift, using your melee, all that kind of stuff, everything in between to generate as many Ionic traces as possible to feed yourself more ability energy, super energy, all that. Again, a lot of my time was spent in the Lawless Frontiers testing this because I do think it is the premier piece of content to really test out your builds, and it is much better than I was really anticipating it to be. The ability to get supers insanely fast is incredibly high. This clip that you're watching right now, I managed to get a new super in the span of 17 seconds. Now, we are in some of the most ideal conditions for something like that to happen. I don't want to say that every single super you're going to get is going to be in 17 seconds, but somewhere in the maybe 30 to 60 second range on average is really not that out of the question, as long as you're able to actually continue to slay out and other people aren't taking all of the kills, which fortunately in Lawless Frontiers isn't that big of a deal. You might have more problems in other pieces of content, maybe not as modern pieces of content, things where we don't have these huge arenas with tons and tons of enemies sprawling out. There you might struggle to really see a good amount of supers coming in, and I would almost recommend at that point to just go to something like a Chaos Reach Geomag type setup, using your super specifically to take out one big target, as opposed to trying to tickle a bunch of smaller targets down into nothing. I think the reason that it works in Lawless Frontiers is because there are so many, it's so target rich that whenever you do pop your super, you do feel like you're going to get a lot of value out of it. Whereas in maybe some more traditional pieces of content that's maybe not target rich, or maybe even in content where your teammates are just slaying out as hard as you are, you're never really going to be able to reach those peaks, and instead of, you know, enjoying yourself, you're just going to be like, I can never really feel like I'm hitting the maximum potential of what this build has to offer. Another weakness of this setup is just kind of restarting the engine, just, you know, starting from scratch, no abilities, no nothing. Lawless Frontiers, not a lot of healing. You can drop all the healing rifts you want. It's not doing a ton. You got to go get those little healing baubles, which means it is a lot easier to die in this kind of place, especially at some of the highest levels towards the end of the experience. And getting the engine up and running when you've already just burned everything and you're just freshly rezzed can be a little infuriating. You know, you gotta start ramping up your weapon kills a whole lot, and against some of these beefier targets, that might not always be that easy. Of course, in content where you are by yourself, solo ops, maybe you're just doing some solo strikes or something like that, the more enemies that you have access to, the more you can just kind of do whatever you need to do and you don't have to worry about anything else. That is where this build is really going to shine, because once you get the engine rolling, it's almost self-sufficient, right? With how many Ionic traces are coming in, and then swapping to Delicate Tomb or like whatever weapons you're using. It's just, you're constantly chaining one thing into the next thing, into the next thing, into the next thing. Your super chains into this, chains into that, and it's a very fun rotation of just trying to maximize how many abilities you can put out, trying to max out how many Ionic Sentries are getting pushed out, how many Arc Souls are coming out, all that kind of stuff, and it makes for me anyway, a very enjoyable gameplay loop that has a lot of actions per minute. If you're big into actions per minute, if you want to hit a lot of buttons as fast as you possibly can, I think you're really going to enjoy this setup. I've even heard of some people soloing the newest dungeon, Equilibrium, with Stormdancers on, which is something I absolutely want to go check out at some point. It is also a very, very target-rich environment, especially the final boss. Quite a lot of stuff going on, well, at least in one of the sections anyway. So that is something I definitely want to start messing around with and seeing how good it actually is in a place like that. But yeah, Arc Warlock is still absolutely cooking, even without all the support that it had in the artifact in Episode 3. This is one of my favorite setups to run. I love how high APM it is. I love all the burst capability, and now at least I have some options too. I don't always have to run with GMX stabilizers. I can break out Stormdancer's Brace and have it actually be good, and have Stormtrance actually feel good to use. The only real weakness of Stormtrance, besides, its slow ramp up, I would say is its range. I have run into many times where I am trying to run over to a group of enemies and I don't maybe want to use my blink too much because that's going to burn a bunch of energy, and everything is dead before I get over there to be able to even use it in the first place. But I do run with teammates who run, very, very, I don't want to say try-hard builds, but very, very good builds, and they're very capable of the game. So you could absolutely, carry a group that maybe doesn't know how to slay out as well as you do with a setup like this. Like, this setup is designed to kill pretty much all adds in an area, and it falls a little bit flat when it comes to single target. I will say that, but that should be very apparent with how weak Stormtrance has been for an incredibly long time. I would love to know if you're running any sort of variants of this setup. I love this setup. I love playing Arc Warlock. Let me know if you've been messing around with Stormdancers. Let me know if you've been messing around with something else completely different. I want to hear it because I really like playing Arc Warlock. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.